Histobiograph.
Late afternoon, dim light from hundreds of candles shines on the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. A 6-year-old girl, dressed in a heavy yellow robe, walked heavily toward the altar. She did not understand the singing that was being sung in Latin. "I don't understand why everyone is looking at me." She didn't understand why the 29-year-old man was about to become her husband. November 1396, Isabelle of France was married to King Richard II of England at the age of 6. No one asked her if she agreed, because in that era, the royal daughter was not human, which is a walking pact. But what's more terrible is, that wasn't the worst thing that happened to her life. When a child is forced to wear a crown, what is the trade-off? And why has history almost forgotten a queen who had to sacrifice her entire childhood in exchange for something called peace? Stay until the end, and you will see. Isabelle's silence was louder than the swords of the times. November 1st, 1396. The bells of St. Paul's Cathedral echo through the foggy London air. Inside, hundreds of candles flicker against stained glass windows, casting golden light on the high stone arches. The crowd is hushed. Nobles from England and France fill the pews, and the scent of incense lingers. But the most striking figure isn't a king or a warrior or a priest. It's a child, just 6 years old. Isabelle of France, clad in gold-embroidered silk, walks slowly toward the altar. Her crown is too large, her train too heavy. She moves not with excitement, but with quiet confusion, barely grasping the gravity of the moment. At the end of the aisle waits for her groom, King Richard II of England. He is 29. The union is not of love, nor of choice. It's a truce wrapped in velvet, a political offering meant to halt a century of war. And the price of that offering? A little girl, handed over like a treaty signed in blood and silk. What kind of world chooses peace over a child's innocence? And what would that sacrifice cost Isabelle in the years to come? To understand the weight placed on Isabelle's tiny shoulders, we must go back to her beginnings. She was born on November 9th, 1389, in the grand halls of the Louvre Palace, a jewel of the French monarchy. Her father was Charles VI of France, a man history would remember not for his power, but for his madness. By the time Isabelle could speak, the king no longer recognized her. He believed he was made of glass, screamed at invisible enemies, and fled down palace corridors like a hunted ghost. Her mother, Isabelle of Bavaria, was no savior, ambitious, manipulative, and emotionally absent. She treated her children as tools, tokens to be exchanged in the cruel game of European diplomacy. Isabelle was their fourth daughter, but to Isabelle, that only meant one more bargaining chip. And when the opportunity came to secure peace with England, Isabelle's fate was sealed without her knowledge, consent, or understanding. She was not raised with fairy tales, but with treaties. Not with lullabies, but with the echo of fractured crowns and fractured minds. And this was the girl, barely out of infancy, who would be sent into the heart of a foreign kingdom to become a queen. The wedding at St. Paul's Cathedral in 1396 was more than just a royal ceremony. It was an elaborate political spectacle where a child was offered up as a sacrifice. Isabelle, in a heavy yellow silk dress, walked among thousands of candlelight. Her little eyes searched for someone familiar among the crowd of strangers, but there was no one. When the archbishop had to kneel down to put the ring on that little finger, the audience remained silent. Not because of emotion, but because we all know this is not love. This is a triumph of cold diplomacy and political greed. Richard II, King of England, 29 years old, stood there, looking at the child who would become his wife, with a distant gaze. He was once deeply in love with his ex-wife, and now was forced to marry a child for political reasons. Confusion was evident in his posture and eyes. But the court does not need a good husband. They needed an obedient king and a queen who could ensure peace through silence. Isabelle's new life began like that, in the midst of a brilliant wedding, but without a single sincere blessing. Despite being given away like a commodity, Isabelle's early years in England were relatively peaceful. Richard II, though her husband in name only, treated her as a daughter. He built a private area for her in Westminster Palace, provided a French teacher, and allowed Isabelle to retain her homeland customs. In the eyes of many, this is a rare, humane thing amid political hysteria. But all that good was temporary, like thin paint covering the cracks in Richard's throne. Outside the palace, England was ablaze with conflict and rebellion. Henry Bolingbroke, the king's nephew, returned from exile with the intention of overthrowing the throne. Just a few months after Isabelle began to get used to royal life, Richard II was dethroned and imprisoned at Pontefract Castle, where he died mysteriously. Isabelle, now only 10 years old, suddenly became the widow of a husband she never understood, and is a queen without a throne in a strange, dangerous land. From princess to queen to prisoner in 4 short years, Isabelle's life is taking a dark turn, and she's too young to understand it. When Richard II died, the big question was what to do with Isabelle. She was a widow, childless, and without real power. But the English court could not easily return her to France, because the £800,000 dowry sent by France had been squandered. If they returned Isabelle, they would be forced to repay the money, something nearly impossible in these chaotic times. The new king, Henry IV, chose to keep her as a golden prisoner. She was taken to Havering Castle, a place far from the royal court, but still comfortable enough to maintain the appearance of a noble princess. Here, Isabelle began writing urgent letters back to France. Each line trembled like a silent cry. I was kept like a prisoner, not allowed to leave, no one to tell me the truth, no comfort. Never before has a child written such rich sentences. Never before has a young queen needed rescuing so much. And then, in a rare moment of sanity, King Charles VI, the mad father, demanded his daughter back. It was the first light that glimmered in Isabelle's darkness, though no one knew what lay behind it. Finally, after months of tense negotiations, the British court was forced to give in. In 1401, Isabelle, then 12 years old, was allowed to return to France. But she did not leave England as a triumphant queen. She returned as an old diplomatic commodity of no further use to the British. When the ship docked, the French escort welcomed her with a simple ceremony, without trumpets nor drums. A child who once made London full of flags and flowers, now quietly returned as if he never existed. At the Louvre, her childhood home, Isabelle no longer finds a home. Her family, still caught up in the maelstrom of power and civil war, views Isabelle's return as a diplomatic inconvenience. Her cold mother, Isabelle of Bavaria, continued to treat her like a pawn on the political chessboard. The father, Charles VI, fell into another bout of madness and did not recognize his daughter. Isabelle was no longer the carefree child she was when she left. Now, she is a 12-year-old girl who understands all too well the price of power and the emptiness of glory. And she knew clearly, this return was not the end, but only the beginning of another bargain. Once again, over her own fate. In 1405, when she had just turned 16, Isabelle was once again traded. This time, it was a marriage to Charles of Orleans, a young nobleman and promising poet. Unlike the first time, this marriage was not celebrated with the ringing of church bells or gold-embroidered dresses for the ignorant child. This time, Isabelle is a young woman who has experienced enough pain to understand. Marriage is not a fairy tale dream. But strangely enough, it was in that arranged marriage that she first learned about true love. Charles was not only a politician, but also a sensitive soul. He knew how to listen to the cracks in Isabelle's heart. They shared poetry, late-night chats, and silent moments without words. In a world that treats women as commodities, Charles is the first man to treat her as a human being with feelings. And Isabelle, who was once called the Golden Bride and a gift to England, was finally called the loving wife. But fate once again did not allow her to hold on to happiness. The shadow of war is silently approaching, and once again, it will take away the person she loves. In 1407, just 2 years after Isabelle found light in her life, Charles of Orleans was captured at the Battle of Agincourt. The English held him as a precious hostage, and though alive, Charles disappeared from her life as if dead. Isabelle, now 18, is effectively a widow again, having never lived a full life with the husband she loved. This is no longer the recurring tragedy of a child robbed of her childhood, but of a woman who understands what loss is. Without Charles by her side, she was forced to return to live in the cold French court, which once considered her a political commodity. But this time, she was no longer an easily manipulated child. Isabelle quietly used what she learned during her years in England and from her own life to influence royal negotiations and politics. Though she held no formal power, she began to be seen as a nameless advisor. It is said that in many big and small decisions of the French court at that time, There was the shadow of her reason and intuition behind them. Broken love did not make her weak, but made her stronger. But deep inside, Isabelle still lives with a lingering pain. She has never been loved and kept that love completely. And then something unexpected happened, a new ray of light in a life that had been filled with darkness. In 1409, Isabelle gave birth to her first daughter, Jean d'Orleans, a small, red baby, crying out within the cold walls of the palace, became her only reason to continue to hope. For the first time, Isabelle became a mother not to serve a political purpose. Jean was the crystallization of love between her and Charles, something they both thought would never happen. But this joy carries a bitter aftertaste. Charles remains in an English prison. Jean will grow up without knowing the warmth of a father. And Isabelle, once again, had to fulfill both their roles in silence. However, this time she did not cry. Gone are the desperate letters from when she was 12, replaced by a determined mother, ready to pass on to her daughter everything she has learned, including the bitter lessons about the world out there. Even though she knew that Jean would probably be married off for the benefit of the court, Isabelle secretly harbored a hope that if we cannot change the world, we can at least sow in our children the seed of strength to stand up for themselves. Isabelle understood very well she was no longer living for herself. And it was then that her fate came to an end, quietly, but with great force. In the last month of 1409, cold wind blew through the stained glass windows of the palace, bringing with it a biting cold. Isabelle, then only 20 years old, became weak after giving birth to Jean. Medics came and went, shaking their heads at her pale skin and ragged breathing. After a life torn apart by political storms, her own body was now beginning to crumble. Isabelle died in silence. No bells, no glorious funeral like the day she became queen at the age of 6. Only a few loyal maids were by her side, wiping the last drop of blood from her hands, and Jean was sleeping soundly in her cradle. There is no poem in her honor. No history book records her name in bold. She left the way she had lived, forgotten in the midst of plans larger than herself. But if you listen closely in the shadows of history, you can still hear that whispering voice. A voice of a woman who was stripped of everything, but still tried to love, live, and leave something, however small, for the next generation. And that story should have been told sooner, because it is not only a tragedy, but also a mirror. But does Isabelle's death close the final chapter? Not necessarily, because the only daughter she left behind, Jean, would grow up in a world not unlike the one in which her mother had been sacrificed. And that is what makes Isabelle's tragedy not isolated, but symbolic. From childhood to motherhood, Isabelle was never able to control herself. The girl was taken out of France like merchandise, then raised as a queen without a throne in England, then imprisoned in the castle for the silence of the kings. Then once again she was forced to marry, only this time she was lucky enough to meet true love. But then that love was taken away. What Isabelle goes through is not just one person's fate, but it is a tragic map of how many noble girls in the Middle Ages were treated as means rather than people. A child forced to become a queen. A young woman was deprived of her first love. A mother died because no one cared about the pain growing in her chest. And at this point, we must ask ourselves, how many other Isabelles have been forgotten like that? And it's time to ask, what reminds us of Isabelle today? Not because she is the Queen of England, nor was it because she was the daughter of a mad king, but because in her silence, there are the buried voices of thousands of girls who lived, dreamed, and were crushed by the wheels of politics. In the letters she sent to France, there was not only longing, but also a cry for help, choked and desperate. "I write in tears," she sobbed, "for I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love, with no hope of return." Isabelle is not rebellious, no resistance, but never bow completely. She wrote, she waited. She used patience as the only form of resistance a child in the palace could choose. And because of that, she becomes a mirror reflecting the absurdity of power, when those in power can decide a person's childhood and life, just in exchange for a few years of temporary peace on the map. But when Isabelle was finally allowed to return to France in 1401, was that the end of the series of tragedies? Not necessarily, because she was no longer the 6-year-old child who stepped out of Paris with wide-eyed excitement, but a 12-year-old girl, calloused by cold rituals, imprisoned in a golden castle, and whose loss had not yet had time to sink in. The French did not welcome her as a returning princess. They looked at her as a used commodity of no political value. Even her mother, Isabelle, did not embrace her, but only coldly nodded. The return did not bring liberation, but a new chapter of loneliness. But the strange thing is, it was in that silence that Isabelle began to write. No more cries for help, but poetry. She recorded her feelings, what was lost, memories like broken glass still lingering in her heart. Perhaps, for the first time in her life, Isabelle was no one's tool. She was just a girl, trying to piece together a broken soul. But fate never gave Isabelle peace for long. In 1405, when she was just 16 years old, the royal palace made a new decision. She would have to remarry, this time to Charles of Orleans, a young man of noble birth and poetic blood. To outsiders, this is yet another political arrangement. But for Isabelle, miracles happened. Charles did not see her as a chess piece, but as a person. They converse in poetry, exchanging gentle songs. And for the first time, Isabelle smiled not out of politeness, but because her heart was truly touched. That love is not noisy, not ostentatious. But for her, it was the first miracle after a lifetime of being determined. Together, they write poems, draw dreams, and whisper small wishes for a private life, free and simple. Is fate finally taking a step back? Or just preparing for a more painful blow? That happiness, as usual, did not last long. Just 2 years after their marriage, in 1407, Charles was captured at the Battle of Agincourt and taken to England as a prisoner of war. Isabelle, once again, was made a widow, though this time not by death, but by unending separation. The only man who ever truly loved her was now imprisoned for 25 years. And Isabelle, at 18, falls back into the familiar cycle of loneliness, ritual, and soulless political obligations. But one thing has changed. Isabelle is no longer the quiet child who gets carried away. She lived on, silently, devotedly. At the French court, she became an observant and thoughtful woman. And though she had no formal power, her advice was always whispered to by young nobles. When her daughter, Jean, was born in 1409, Isabelle found a final ray of light. A reason to live, to pass on what I once lost. But even that comfort came with a nagging worry. Would her daughter repeat her own fate? Isabelle didn't have much time to find an answer. Just a few months after giving birth to Jean, she fell seriously ill due to postpartum complications. The day she closed her eyes and passed away. She was only 20 years old. The early Paris wind blew through the window where she lay, bringing with it an autumn that had not yet arrived. There was no funeral as grand as the day she married Richard II. There were no 1,000 candles, no organ concert, no procession stretching for miles. Her death was as quiet as the life she never chose. Those who used her as a gift in political deals got what they wanted. A peace treaty, a dowry, a new generation with both French and English blood. And she, Isabelle, was still just a small name in a great history, a supporting character in the drama of emperors. But, even though forgotten on paper, her life still leaves an indelible question mark. Is peace worth it if the price is a child's childhood and human rights? Though time has washed away all the whispers in the palace corridors, that question still echoes through the centuries. Isabelle was not the only victim, but her story opens the door to a clearer view into the dark side of treaties once hailed as for lasting peace. Centuries later, history continues to witness hundreds of girls forced to become queens, princesses, or symbols of harmony, while they themselves are deprived of their own rights. Isabelle's pain is not simply a personal tragedy. It is the crystallization of an entire system of power built on the silence of girls. And in that silence, the truth was buried. The feelings were abandoned, and the graves were erected without real names. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the sound of tiny footsteps, echoed through St. Paul's Cathedral that day. A child is crowned before he even knows what childhood is. Isabelle of France is not just a forgotten name. She is a mirror of what politics can do to a child. When personal honor and sovereignty are traded for peace, only on paper, she lived like a queen, but never had the right to be a woman. And when he died at the age of 20, Isabelle left no golden monuments, but is a question that remains unanswered. How many childhoods have we taken away in the name of stability? Today, millions of girls are still forced into marriage at a young age, and Isabelle's story is a wake-up call. Is a handful of ashes still holding the fire, the fire of truth. If you ever believed that history was a place for the strong, remember that sometimes it is the weakest people who feel the deepest pain. Please share this story to let forgotten voices be heard again. And if you were Isabelle or knew someone like her, don't be silent. Speak up, because justice is never late. Only when we dare not name it.